Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at Hemingway's Inner Time, focusing on war. Last time we've been taking a look at how he represents love. Today we're going to be taking a look at how he represents war. And just some context about Hemingway. He actually was in World War One as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross, and he would be taking candies and chocolates and supplies to the front lines, and so we got to see it firsthand. And as he was doing so, right, in between certain battles, and being able to see the actual grittiness and horrors of World War One, he actually got an up close encounter. He kept trying to get closer and closer to the war, so that he had stories to tell. Right, he's kind of this adventurer who heard about these romantic tales of war, and he wanted to kind of go and see war for the first time. And so as he travels to Europe and gets closer and closer to the war, as he is in Italy on the Italian front, and helping injured people, right? Not just bringing chocolates and candies and supplies, but also helping people who are injured. He was pulling one individual on the Italian front back from the front lines when an Austrian trench mortar hit him. And if you don't know what an Austrian trench mortar is, it's essentially like a big oil drum filled with explosives and shrapnel. And when it explodes, you have all those tiny pieces of metal that go everywhere. And as he was pulling someone from the front lines, he was hit, and he received 237 wounds from his waist down. And he spent the rest of the summer in and out of surgeries and trying to rehab from his wounds. And what we're going to see is how he represents this war. I want you to think about Inner Time. Even though it's a collection of short stories, in some ways it's also a novel, right? So it has similar themes, similar ideas, similar experiences that people are sharing throughout. And so even though each story is a little bit different, each story is connected thematically through the idea of war, right? In Our Time, how he sees the world of love and war in his time. Just to kind of show you a couple images. This is Hemingway and his mother Grace and his father Ed, who is I mentioned before, a doctor, and then his siblings. And then this is him at war. This is him going off to fight in World War One, and this is him injured on crutches, spending the rest of the time during that summer on crutches. And during this time, he fell in love with a nurse who is about 10 years older than him. Her name was Agnes von Kurowski, and they spent a romantic whirlwind love affair summer together in Italy as he was recuperating. And at the end of the summer, she goes to open up another hospital, and he's supposed to be returning back to the United States to find a job so that they can get married. As he goes back home, she writes him a Dear John letter, essentially saying that his and her love was just a boy and girl thing, and she's fallen in love with this Italian major, and they're going to go off and live happily ever after. And so this deeply affected Hemingway and scarred him to a point where he kept Agnes's letters throughout his life. They found afterwards that he had letters that he kept from her in his pocket, and so this was something that deeply affected him in some ways for negative, but also in some ways for positive. It's this deepness that enables him to be able to really dig down and to think about how he's constructing his ideas of love and war. He then later returns to Paris and becomes part of the Lost Generation. Here you see Hemingway and his first wife, Hadley, here. And he goes to Paris and becomes part of this bohemian kind of culture. And he writes his first book, In Our Time, which is thinking about his experiences with the war about 6 years before. Right before he writes this, he was in war. And about 6 years later, he comes back and writes In Our Time and writes about his experience. And in some ways, it's him encapsulating his ideas of World War One but in some ways it's very therapeutic for him. He once said that if he couldn't write, he couldn't live, and so he found writing as a catharsis for him. As we take a look at his definition of love, I want to take a look at a couple of traditional representations of war, and how Hemingway is going to take a look, be influenced by these, but he's also going to do something quite different from it. I wanted to turn to Lord Alfred Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade, and some of you may have some familiarity with this in high school. Some of you may be unfamiliar with it. It doesn't necessarily matter how much familiarity with it, you have with it. I wanted to talk about some of its ideas. It was also referred to in The Blind Side, if you've ever watched The Blind Side. This is the poem that the protagonist was writing on. Just wanted you to get a sense of what's being celebrated here. And this is a battle between England and Russia. And what happens in this particular battle is someone makes a mistake, and as a result, soldiers' lives are lost. And so Tennyson writes a poem to honor those fallen soldiers. I want you to think about what he's really honoring here. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all into the valley of death rode the 600. For the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said, into the valley of death rode the 600. For the light brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered, right? Someone made a mistake. Theirs is not to make reply, theirs is not to reason why. Theirs is but to do and die, right? That's kind of the life, the motto, the mantra of a soldier, right? Not to reason, just to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering their gunners there, charging an army, while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed out with shot and shell. While horse and hero fell, they that fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them left of the 600. When will their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the light brigade, noble 600. And I want you to think about, why do the soldiers still move forward, even though someone, right, one of the leaders messed up, right? Why is it that they decided to continue on? And what commentary is the poem making on war? And does the poem glorify or criticize war or the efforts of war? I wanted to juxtapose this with more of a modernist view of war by taking a look at Thomas Hardy, who's more of a modern poet who's writing this in 1902. And he has a slightly different perspective of war. And I want you to think about, what is his perspective of war and how is this different? Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have sat us down to wet right many a napperkin. But range as infantry and staring face to face, I shot him as he shot at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so, my foe of course he was, that's clear enough, although he thought he had enlist, perhaps, offhand like, just as I was out of work and sold his traps. No other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious war is. You shoot a fellow down. You treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown. And so here you have these two soldiers that are fighting, and the question is, what are they fighting about? Do they know what they're fighting about, right? Why does he kill the other man? Does he fully understand it himself? And what commentary is the poem making on war? Is the poem glorifying or criticizing war? And I want you to juxtapose this one with the charge of the Light Brigade, right? How does this one view war differently? What's the emphasis? Who's the emphasis of this one? How is this one more of a personalized account of what war is? And how is the charge of the Light Brigade more of a generalized poem, right? So we think about the narrator, right? The narrator is important. Who's the narrator in the charge of the Light Brigade? And who's the narrator of this one, right? How do we see a different type of perspective with this one? Now, I want to now apply that to these ideas, this transition of how we see war with Hemingway and in our time. And the vignettes are the little short paragraphs that you see in between each short story, right? A vignette is just a short little word picture. And most of these, or at least the first 6 of them in particular, deal with war. And I want you to think about how Hemingway is representing war in the modern world. Is he glorifying it? What is he glorifying? Is he criticizing? What is he criticizing about it? He says, everybody was drunk. The whole battery was drunk going along the road in the dark. And I want you to think about why they're drunk, right? Why are soldiers drinking? And especially, you would think that would be kind of unusual because you want to have heightened senses in a time of war, right? What's going on beneath that surface? We were going to Champagne. The lieutenant kept riding his horse out in the fields and saying to him, I'm drunk, I tell you, Menvois, I'm so sauced. We went along the road all night in the dark, and the adjutant kept riding up alongside my kitchen and saying, you must put it out. It's dangerous. It will be observed. We were 50 kilometers from the front, but the adjutant worried about the fire in my kitchen. It was going along the road. It was funny going along the road. That was when I was a kitchen corporal. And so, again, who is the narrator, right? We have a different type of narration. We have first person, which gives us really intimately into the lives, to the perspective of this particular person. Now, I want you to think about In Our Time as a collection, as a novel, right? In a sense, it is a novel, similar kind of ideas, similar themes that are happening throughout. And in one way, right, just like a novel, there is a central character. And I would argue to you that Nick Adams is that reoccurring character. We see him in Indian Camp. We see him again in The Doctor and the Doctor's Wife. We see him again in The End of Something, and 3 Day Blow. He keeps coming back. And so it's almost to say now he's at war, and what is he experiencing? How are these experiences shaping him? What's happening? Why are the soldiers drunk? Why is the adjutant so on edge, right? Take a look at vignette number 2. I'm just going to read through some of these with you. The minarets, which is a part of a mosque, stuck up in the rain out of Adrianople across the mudflats. The carts were jammed for 30 miles along the Karagach Road. Water buffalo and cattle were hauling carts through the mud. No end and no beginning. Just carts loaded with everything they owned, right? This is an evacuation after taking over a town. The old men and women soaked through, walked along, keeping the cattle moving. The Maritsa, which was a river, was running yellow almost up to the bridge. Carts were jammed solid on the bridges, with camels bobbing along through them. Greek cavalry herded along the procession. Women and kids were in the carts, crouched with mattresses, mirrors, sewing machine, bundles. There was a woman having a kid with a young girl holding a blanket over her and crying, scared sick looking at it. It rained all through the evacuation. So again, this is a different type of image that we see of war, right? So this isn't just of soldiers and how they have honor, glory, going off to kill for God and country. This is affecting the lives of people who are non-combatants, who have nothing really to do with war. These are innocent civilians who are now being evacuated from their home because another invading army has come in and taken over. And this is the effects, right? The unintended effects of war. Here's another one, taking a look at war. I want you to think about the word choice that he uses. We were in the Garden of Mons. Young Buckley came in with his patrol from across the river. The first German I saw climbed over the garden wall. We waited till he got one leg over and then potted him. He had so much equipment on and looked awfully surprised and fell down into the garden. Then 3 more came over farther down the wall. We shot them. They all came just like that. And so here, this isn't like a face-to-face, here we're going to go on the battlefield and just kind of march towards each other and kill each other. This is someone that's actually using strategy, right? But also kind of hiding out and shooting people as they come over. And so this is using human ingenuity in order to make killing more effective, right? See similar ideas in vignette number 4. It was a frightfully hot day. We jammed an absolutely perfect barricade across the bridge. It was simply priceless. A big old wrought iron grating from the front of the house, too heavy to lift, and you could shoot through it, and they would have to climb over it. It was absolutely topping, right? So I want you to think about the words they're using to describe this barricade, right? Perfect, priceless topping. They tried to get over it, and we potted them from 40 yards. They rushed it, and officers came out alone and worked on it. It was an absolutely perfect obstacle. Their officers were very fine. They were frightfully put out when we heard the flank had gone and we had to fall back. So this is the idea of taking enjoyment in killing others, right? And so there's this kind of loss of humanity that we see being experienced in war. Taking a look at this one. This one is kind of an interesting vignette that shows that things that are out of sorts. If you've ever read as a child Wacky Wednesday, right? That book that everything is out of sorts and then the kids have to go through and find out all of the things that are wrong. This is kind of like a Wacky Wednesday, except this is taking place during war and it's much more serious. They shot 6 cabinet ministers at 6:30 in the morning against the wall of a hospital. There were pools of water in the courtyard. There were wet dead leaves on the paving of the courtyard. It rained hard. All the shutters of the hospital were nailed shut. One of the ministers was sick with typhoid. 2 soldiers carried him downstairs and out into the rain. They tried to hold him up against the wall, but he sat down in a puddle of water. The other 5 stood very quietly against the wall. Finally, the officer who told the soldiers it was no good trying to make him stand up. When they fired the first volley, he was sitting down in the water with his head on his knees. As we think about this particular vignette, right? Who's being shot here? There are 6 cabinet ministers. Cabinet ministers are not people who have guns, right? These are just paper pushers, people that are ministers in the government. And so generally, they don't really pose a direct threat to soldiers. And so generally, for a soldier, there's no honor in killing them. But here, there is some type of perversion within war. Either this is a mutiny or the invading army comes in and starts killing everybody, right? Either way, this is not what's supposed to happen during war. What we also have is the hospital that is nailed shut. And as they line them up against the hospital, which is generally a place of healing, becomes an instrument of death. And then you have the one person who is too sick with typhoid to even stand up. Even he is executed. And so people that are not posing a threat, a direct threat, are being shot. Rather than taken prisoner or rather than just being dismissed, they're actually shot in order to make a statement. So here we see the complete brutalization, the complete dehumanization that happens during war. I wanted to kind of end here with vignette number 6 as we start to introduce to you the image of war that we see with Hemingway. Very similar to some of the discussion that we talked about with his representation of love, that this isn't supposed to be something that's romantic or idealized. This is something that is real, right? He's representing real kind of occurrences, what really happens, right? As Hemingway was at war, he saw events like this, and he says that there is no glory or honor in day-to-day fighting with war. There is honor in continuing to go on and continuing to do your best and continuing to survive. But this idea, this traditional heroism that we see within the charge of the Light Brigade is gone within the modern world. Here we see a re-emergence of Nick Adams as this kind of central character to the collection. Nick sat against the wall of the church where they had dragged him to be clear of machine gun fire in the street, right? So they were dragging him. He is injured. Both legs stuck out awkwardly. He had been hit in the spine. His face was sweaty and dirty. The sun shone on his face. The day was very hot. Rinaldi, big-backed, his equipment sprawling, lay face downward against the wall. Nick looked straight ahead brilliantly. The pink wall of the house opposite had fallen out from the roof, and an iron bedstead hung twisted toward the street. I want you to think about that, right? Why a pink wall, not like a blue wall or not like a beige wall, right? This is a pink wall, which would suggest that this is a house that had a little girl, that now that house is in the street, right? And so Hemingway's getting us to kind of think about these things, right? The humanity, the loss, the civilians that are affected by it, without actually specifically, mentioning them. 2 Austrian dead lay in the rubble in the shade of the house. Up the street were other dead. Things were getting forward in the town, meaning that the advance was getting forward. It was going well, right? And so again, that use of well here is almost kind of sarcastic, because if for war to be going well, that means that a lot of people are dying. Stretcher bearers would be along any time now. Nick turned his head carefully and looked at Rinaldi. Sente, Rinaldi, sente. You and me, we've made a separate peace. Rinaldi lay still in the sun, breathing with difficulty. Not patriots, he said. Nick turned his head carefully away, smiling sweatily. Rinaldi was a disappointing audience. And so we think about this, right? So we see that Nick is injured. We're not exactly sure why. There is some indication that they're not patriots and they made a separate peace, that maybe they have self-inflicted wounds. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it seems as though they're both excited to be done with the war. So this idea of wanting to go out and fight for God and country seems to be lost here. What people are trying to do really, truly in war is to survive, to see the next day. And so Nick is excited that he is able to now go home now that he is wounded. And so Rinaldi, who is a disappointing audience, is probably a little bit more injured than Nick, and he's just really really struggling to just survive in this particular moment. But it's a different image that we see of war that's being emerged, right, that Hemingway is emphasizing. I want you to be able to see that, to get that sense of how he's representing this idea of war, and how does this similar to some of the ideas that we talked about in his discussion of love.